Hello and welcome everybody to another session of Three Things Thursday, and Happy New Year to all of you. We are starting this week with our halfway through the school year and some tips. This time of the year is a perfect time to review some important things before the end of the school year in May. So we're almost halfway through. So we thought we will share some tips on back to going to virtual, because we know that some school districts are now going back to virtual school, at least for this week or for the next few weeks. So we'll share some 3 tips on back to going to virtual, and then 3 tips if your child has an IEP and you're going virtual. So a couple of things to keep in mind as you're going virtual. Make sure that you have all the contact information of the people that you need to contact in the school. So it could be the teacher, it could be the any other people that are involved in your child's education. So it could be the paraprofessional, it could be the speech therapy or occupational therapy. Just make sure you have your direct contact information or the best way to contact them, especially when you're going virtual. It would, making sure that you have everything that you would need, that your child has everything they would need in order to be able to be successful in this first 2 weeks of school if they are virtual. The other thing to keep in mind is attendance. Every school system, especially in the virtual format, they determine how attendance will be marked. Sometimes your child might have to log in for every class in order to get attendance to say that they've been attending a school that day. Or it might be at the beginning of the class, or it might be at the end of the day. So make sure what process is being followed in your school for attendance, so that your child does get the credit for attending class that day. And then if your child is unable to attend school, then and they're virtual, then what are some of the things you need to that the school has, that you need to send in to the school. So really finding out what the process is in your school for attendance is important, especially if you're virtual. And the other thing is transition. We know that some schools are starting just this week virtual, and then next week they're going in person. Some are doing the first 2 weeks virtual. So trying to ease that transition for your child from virtual to in person, and it's a lot to take in as a family. You have to, I understand many of us had to reorganize our schedules in order to be home for our children, or organize somebody to be at home with them as they're transitioning to virtual school, or even kind of organize them, get your child organized for the virtual school. So try to mimic the virtual setup as much as possible as the school setup, so that when your child does transition into school, it won't be that big of a change. We all know that our children kind of regress a little bit when they come back after a break. And so we've had a 10-day break, and now our children are back, and some of them are not back in person, but they're back in virtual. And so trying to ease that transition. So, really be kind to yourself, be kind to your children, because this is a hard transition for everyone all around, especially this first week. So give some grace to yourself too, if you're trying to implement virtual, the virtual school for your child this week, because the constant change between virtual and in person is hard for everyone, including the teachers and the professionals at the school system. So, really try to find ways to make this transition as smooth as possible for your child and for yourself. The other 3 tips that we want to share are, if your child is in virtual school and they do have an IEP or an individualized educational program. So if you have not already, hopefully your school has already contacted you, but if you have not already been contacted by your IEP team, then you want to make sure that you contact your IEP team, especially if your child was attending in-person school in December and then now they're going virtual, to make sure that the goals in the IEP, are there anything that needs to be changed? Are the goals really, sometimes goals are geared for in-person kind of setup. So making sure that the goals are geared to facilitate this virtual platform that your child is using. So do the goals need to be changed or tweaked or amended? Also, the supports that your child needs. If your child is using a communication device, if your child has a screen reader, your child might need a laptop. If your child is getting has a parapro in the classroom in person, how are those changes going to be supported in virtual school? What are those changes and what are those accommodations? Are they set up in the virtual system that you have right now? Those are some things to think about as you launch into virtual school this week. The other thing is to consider has there been a change in placement? By this we mean, so if your child was in a resource classroom, but now in the virtual setup, they are 100% in the general ed classroom, that means there's been some change in placement happening there. Or if your child has been in a general ed classroom in person, but now they have moved them to a resource classroom, then there are some change in placement that is happening. So making sure if there is a change in placement, then that has to be done through an IEP meeting. So make sure that you are contacting the school and your IEP team to find out if there is a change in placement happening. And if so, what does that look like? And what would be the changes in the supports that your child is getting, if at all, through virtual setup? So those are important things to think about as you're moving through virtual school. I know this is a lot to take in, but also we've been through this before. So some of us are veterans at having virtual school and working with it. But just some three things to think about as you're moving into virtual school, and then also thinking about when your child is transitioning back into in-person, would there be any changes that would be happening in their IEP goals and things like that. So if your child is receiving speech therapy services, if your child is receiving OT services, would that still continue in the virtual setup? How would it look like in the virtual setup? Those are some questions that you might want to consider asking your IEP team. So as always, call us. We can definitely help you more in depth with some tips and ideas and suggestions in order to make this transition smooth. And especially now, as I talked about earlier in the first slide, we're halfway through the school year, and there are some things that you need to start thinking about if you haven't already done so as we start this halfway through the school year. So we're going to talk about, next week, we're going to talk about looking at progress reports, so IEP progress reports, any kind of testing reports that have happened over the past 3 or 4 months. So, we're going to look at that and how that's really important. I know most of us, we focus a lot on the IEP meeting. Well, the IEP meeting is important, and the goals in there that are established and everything that goes along with the IEP meeting is very, very important, but it doesn't stop there. What we as parents have to really do is also focus on the progress reports, because we could have a beautifully written IEP with really good goals, but is the child making adequate progress? That's important to see. So we will look at that and some tips about tips to help you read the progress report and understand it, and then what that means for your child, and what are some things that you can do in order to set up your child for success, and some things the IEP team can do so that you have a successful year, and then the transition into the next year is as smooth as it can be. So again, thank you all so much for joining us today for our 3 Things Thursday. And I hope you'll join us again next week. As always, call us or email us. We are always here to, help you with any questions that you have. So thank you again, and see you next week.